The house next door had been a hollow thing for as long as I'd lived in mine. A two-story silence of drawn curtains and a lawn that grew just a little too long between mowings by a service I never saw. It was a mirror, in a way. My own house was just as quiet, just as contained. I worked from home, a graphic designer tethered to a glowing screen, my social interactions filtered through emails and project management software. Loneliness wasn't a sharp pain anymore. It was a dull, ambient hum, the background radiation of my life. I had become an expert in solitude, a connoisseur of silence. My world was a carefully curated collection of grayscale routines. Wake, work, eat, sleep, repeat. Then, Julian moved in. The silence next door broke. It started with the groan of a moving truck, the clipped shouts of men hauling furniture, the percussive slam of doors. For the first time in 3 years, I found myself distracted from my work, drawn to the window that overlooked his driveway. I watched, a ghost in my own home, as a life was unpacked and assembled piece by piece. A sturdy oak dining table. Boxes marked kitchen, a ridiculously large leather armchair that looked like it had stories to tell. And him, Julian. I learned his name from a piece of misdelivered mail. Julian Vance. The name felt solid, like he did. He was a man built of steady lines and quiet competence. I watched him direct the movers with an economy of words and gestures, his presence alone seeming to command respect. He had dark hair, threaded with silver at the temples that caught the afternoon light, and a jaw that looked like it had been set against a persistent headwind. He was not my neighbor. He was a character from a novel I would have enjoyed reading, dropped unceremoniously into the bland paperback of my own life. Gossip travels fast, even in a neighborhood of quiet fences and closed doors. Mrs. Gable from 3 houses down, the self-appointed archivist of our little suburban pocket, had informed me over the recycling bins one Tuesday that he was a widower. His wife had passed away about a year ago, she'd said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Cancer. He'd sold their old house, the one with all the memories, and was starting over. The information settled in my chest, a heavy, complicated stone. It explained the deep-set quiet in his eyes, the way he sometimes stood on his new porch and stared at nothing, his shoulders bearing a weight I couldn't see. It made my fascination with him feel vaguely predatory, my lonely observations an intrusion on his grief. So I retreated, pulling my own curtains a little tighter. But you can't unsee a thing. I was aware of him now, a constant presence in my periphery. I learned the sound of his truck starting in the morning. I saw him carrying bags of soil, his forearms dusted with dirt, his t-shirt clinging to the broad plane of his back. He was rebuilding a life from the studs out, while I was just maintaining, dusting the surfaces of my own quiet desperation. Each glimpse of him was a small, sharp reminder of everything I wasn't doing, everything I wasn't living. He was action, I was stasis. He was a force of nature, I was a still life. The knock came on a Saturday. It was so unexpected that for a moment, I thought it was part of the soundtrack from the movie I was half watching. It came again, a solid, patient rap of knuckles against wood. Not a delivery person's frantic tattoo, not a solicitor's hopeful rhythm. It was a deliberate, confident sound. It was his sound. My heart did a stupid, frantic little tap dance against my ribs. I paused the movie, the silence of the room rushing in to amplify my sudden anxiety. What do? Pretend I'm not home? That was my usual strategy. But I'd been watching him in his yard just 10 minutes ago. He knew I was here. My house was a ship I rarely abandoned. Taking a deep breath, I walked to the door, my socked feet silent on the hardwood floor. I smoothed down my t-shirt, a faded gray thing with a coffee stain I decided was part of its character, and ran a hand through my perpetually messy hair. I felt like a hermit crab being prodded out of its shell. I opened the door just a crack, peering out as if the sun were too bright. He was. Up close, Julian was more substantial than my furtive glances from the window had allowed. Taller, broader in the shoulders. He wore a simple, dark blue Henley that stretched just enough across his chest to suggest the solid form beneath. His face was all pleasant, weary lines, the kind etched by both laughter and loss. A faint scent drifted from him, sawdust and something clean, like soap and fresh air. It was a smell that spoke of tangible work, of things being built and fixed. Sorry to bother you, he said. His voice, It was exactly as I'd imagined, only richer. A low, gravelly timbre that seemed to vibrate in the air between us. It was a voice you'd want to hear reading you a story in a dark room. My own internal sarcasm kicked in immediately. Get a grip, Leo. No, not at all. I managed, my own voice sounding thin and reedy by comparison. I opened the door wider, a gesture of surrender. I'm Leo, Julian, he said, a faint, almost smile touching the corners of his mouth. It didn't quite reach his eyes, but it was there. I know we haven't officially met. I was wondering if I could borrow you for a minute. I need a second pair of hands. My brain short-circuited. Borrow me. The phrase was so practical, so direct. As if I were a tool, a wrench, or a hammer he could grab from a shed. Strangely, I didn't mind. For the first time in a long time, I felt useful. Sure. Of course, I said, maybe a little too quickly. What do you need? Trying to hang a picture. It's unwieldy, he said, gesturing back toward his open front door. My wife, she bought it years ago. Big, heavy thing. I just can't seem to manage it on my own. He said the word wife so easily, so naturally. It wasn't a ghost haunting his speech. It was a simple fact. A part of his story. The heavy stone in my chest shifted, becoming something softer, something like understanding. Lead the way, I said, stepping out onto my porch and pulling the door closed behind me. The concrete was cool beneath my socks. I hadn't even thought to put on shoes. Of course I hadn't. I followed him across the small patch of lawn that separated our two quiet kingdoms, feeling utterly exposed in the bright afternoon light. I was a creature of indoor shadows, and he was dragging me into the sun. His house smelled of new paint and old wood. It was emptier than mine, the room still echoing with possibility. Boxes were stacked against the walls, waiting to be unpacked. It was a space in transition, caught between what it was and what it would be. He led me down a hallway, and there it was. The picture. It was a massive canvas, an abstract swirl of deep blues and furious golds, encased in a thick, ornate wooden frame that looked like it weighed more than I did. It was leaning against the wall, dominating the narrow space. See, he said with a dry chuckle. It's a monster. Wow, that's substantial, I said, stating the obvious. That's one word for it, he said. She had an eye for things that made a statement. I just need to get it onto this. He pointed to two heavy-duty hooks already screwed into the opposite wall. The space was tight. The hallway was a narrow channel, barely wide enough for two people to stand side by side. Okay, I said, my mind trying to work through the physics of the situation. How do you want to do this? I'll take the bottom. It's heavier. If you can just grab the top, guide it, keep it from scraping the wall. We lift on 3, he instructed. He was already crouching, his hands finding purchase on the thick lower edge of the frame. The muscles in his forearms bunched. I moved to the other end, my back to the wall where the hooks were. My hands felt clumsy and smooth against the carved wood of the frame. I was acutely aware of him, of the sound of his breathing, of the sheer physical space he occupied. Ready? He asked, his voice low and focused. I nodded, my throat suddenly dry. Ready. 1, 2, 3. We lifted. The weight was immense, far heavier than I'd anticipated. A surprised grunt escaped my lips. The frame was awkward, the sheer size of it making it difficult to control. My job was to guide it, but my arms were already starting to tremble with the strain. Easy does it. Julian's voice came from below, a calm anchor in my momentary panic. Just walk it back toward the wall. I shuffled backward, my socked feet giving me little traction on the polished floorboards. My focus narrowed to the few inches between the edge of the frame and the freshly painted wall. Don't scratch the wall. Don't drop the ridiculously expensive-looking piece of art. Don't make a complete fool of yourself in front of the stoic, handsome widower next door. My heel snagged on the edge of a runner rug I hadn't seen. My balance vanished. The world tilted, and my grip on the frame faltered. The top of the heavy canvas began to tip away from me, back toward the center of the hall. Whoa, I've got you, Julian said, his voice sharp with sudden concern. In a movement that was shockingly fast, he surged forward. He didn't let go of the frame. Instead, he shifted his entire body, using his shoulder and chest to brace the bottom, while one of his hands shot up, not to grab the frame, but to grab the wall above my head. His other arm, the one still holding the bulk of the weight, pressed forward. The result was a cage. My back hit the wall with a soft thud. The heavy frame was in front of me, its weight now largely supported by Julian. His body was flush against it, and by extension, flush against me. His hand was planted on the wall just beside my head, his other arm a rigid bar of muscle. I was pinned, trapped between the wall and the unyielding presence of my new neighbor. Time seemed to slow down, stretching into a thick, syrupy consistency. I could feel the warmth of his body through the thin cotton of my shirt. I could smell the faint, clean scent of his skin, the sawdust, the subtle note of a cologne that was barely there. My own breathing had hitched in my throat. I was staring at the weave of his Henley, at the strong column of his neck, at the way the silver in his hair caught the dim light of the hallway. He adjusted his grip, the movement causing his chest to press more firmly against me. My heart, which had been doing a frantic tap dance, was now pounding a heavy, primal drumbeat that I was sure he could feel. He was so close. Too close. The air crackled with a sudden, intense voltage. "You okay?" he asked, his voice a low rumble that vibrated right through me. I couldn't speak. I could only look up, my eyes finally meeting his. His gaze was steady, unreadable. There was no panic in his eyes, no annoyance. Just a quiet, intense focus. He was looking at me, really looking, and I felt stripped bare, all my quiet pining and lonely observations laid out for him to see. His eyes flickered down to my mouth for a fraction of a second, a movement so quick I might have imagined it. But I didn't. The moment stretched. 1 second. 2. The weight of the painting, the awkwardness of our position, the entire world outside this narrow hallway seemed to dissolve. There was only the heat of him, the solid wall at my back, and the charged silence between us. My back was to the wall, and everything I had been keeping locked inside was suddenly right there on the surface, ready to break free. He was the one who broke the spell. He blinked, a slow, deliberate motion, and a hint of something. Was it concern? Regret flashed in his eyes. He took a steadying breath, the movement a tangible pressure against my chest. "Let's set this down," he said, his voice still low, but now with a layer of careful control. Carefully. I just nodded, my mind still reeling. We lowered the monstrous frame to the floor, the sound of the wood settling against the floorboards unnaturally loud in the quiet hall. As soon as the weight was gone, Julian stepped back. He created a space between us, a chasm of about 3 feet that felt like a mile. He didn't look at me. He ran a hand over the back of his neck, a gesture that seemed uncharacteristically uncertain. "Sorry about that," he said, his gaze fixed on the painting as if it were the most interesting thing in the world. "Should have seen that rug." "It's fine," I said, my voice a little hoarse. "No harm done." I was still standing with my back against the wall, as if my feet had been nailed to the floor. My entire nervous system was humming, every nerve ending lit up and buzzing. "Maybe this wasn't a two-man job after all," he mused, still avoiding my eyes. "Maybe it's a leave it on the floor until you hire professionals job." I offered a weak smile. "Or a buy smaller art job." That got a small huff of a laugh from him. He finally looked at me, and the unreadable expression was back, a mask of polite neighborliness settling over whatever I thought I'd seen just moments before. Probably the wisest choice. "Thanks for your help, Leo. I appreciate you trying." "Anytime," I said, the word automatic. My brain was slowly rebooting, trying to process the data from the last 5 minutes. The proximity, the heat, the look in his eyes. Had I imagined it all? Was I just projecting my own desperate loneliness onto a simple, accidental moment of closeness? Probably. Almost certainly. I walked back to my own house in a daze, the cool concrete under my socks a distant sensation. I closed my door, the click of the latch sealing me back inside my quiet world. But the silence was different now. It was no longer just an absence of sound. It was filled with the echo of his low voice, the memory of his scent, the phantom pressure of his body against mine. The grayscale of my life had been touched with color, a vibrant and terrifying splash of deep blue and furious gold, and I had a sinking feeling that it was permanent. The days that followed were a study in hyper-awareness. My quiet observation of my neighbor was no longer passive. It was active, charged, and deeply analytical. Every time I saw him, my brain replayed the scene in the hallway. The memory was a brand on my consciousness. I dissected every micro-expression, every casual gesture, searching for confirmation of what I thought I'd felt. He waved to me from his driveway the next morning, a simple lift of his hand. But did his fingers linger in the air a moment too long? Was his smile a little strained, a little too conscious? Or was I just a man starving for meaning, trying to make a feast out of a single crumb? I saw him wrestling with a stubborn rose bush near our shared property line. He was wearing old jeans and a faded gray sweatshirt, the sleeves pushed up to his elbows. He grunted with effort, his face set in a grim line of determination. I watched from my kitchen window, coffee cup warming my hands, feeling like a complete creep. He was just a man gardening. But I saw the tension in his shoulders, the strength in his forearms, and I remembered the feeling of being pinned against the wall, surrounded by that same quiet strength. He finally yanked the offending root free from the earth, stumbling back a step from the force of it. He stood there for a moment, breathing heavily, and then he laughed. A real, genuine laugh that reached his eyes and made them crinkle at the corners. The sound carried across the lawn, and it hit me with the force of a physical blow. It was the first time I'd heard him truly laugh. It was a beautiful sound. He caught me watching. His laughter died, and his eyes met mine through the window pane. My first instinct was to dive behind the counter like a cartoon character. But I was frozen, caught in the beam of his gaze. For a long second, we just stared at each other. I couldn't decipher his expression. It wasn't accusatory. It wasn't annoyed. It was questioning. Then, he gave me a small, slow nod and turned back to his work. My heart hammered against my ribs. He knew. He knew I was watching him, and he didn't seem to mind. Or maybe he was just too polite to call out the weirdo next door for staring. My internal monologue was a relentless cycle of hope and self-deprecation. He's interested. / he thinks you're a stalker. / that look meant something. / that look meant, please close your blinds, you pathetic recluse. The small touches began to accumulate, each one a piece of kindling on a slowly building fire. We met at our mailboxes, which stood side by side at the end of our driveways. As I reached for my mail, my hand brushed against his. A fleeting, skin-on-skin contact that sent a jolt up my arm. Sorry, I mumbled, pulling my hand back as if I'd touched a hot stove. No problem, he said, his voice calm, but his eyes held that same intense, searching quality I'd seen in the hallway. He didn't move his hand away immediately. It lingered there, in the space where mine had been, for a beat too long. Another crumb for me to analyze for days. Another time, I was struggling to get a large, flat-packed bookcase out of my car. It was awkward and heavy, and I was about to give up and unbox it right there on the pavement when his voice cut through my frustration. Looks like you could use a hand with that. I turned to see him jogging across his lawn towards me. He hadn't even waited for an answer. He just saw a need and moved to fill it. That was Julian. I think you're right, I said, grateful. Together, we maneuvered the box out of my car and up the steps to my porch. He took the heavier end without discussion. As we set it down, his hand came to rest on the small of my back, a steadying, guiding pressure. It was a perfectly normal, helpful gesture. But it wasn't. The touch was firm, the warmth of his palms seeping through my shirt, and it lasted a full 2 seconds after the box was safely on the ground. My breath caught. I was acutely aware of his fingers spread against my spine, a proprietary, protective gesture that had no place in a simple act of neighborly assistance. There you go, he said, finally removing his hand. The absence of his touch was as potent as its presence. Thanks, Julian. I owe you one, I said, trying to sound casual, as if my entire body wasn't humming with the residual energy of that touch. We're even, he said, nodding toward his own house. The painting is still on the floor, a ghost of a smile played on his lips. He remembered. Of course he remembered. He was referencing the moment that had become the new center of my universe. I spent the rest of the day in a fog of what-ifs. Each interaction was a clue, a piece of a puzzle I was desperate to solve. Was he just a tactile, helpful person? Or was he, like me, speaking a language of gestures and glances because words were too direct, too risky? I replayed every shared look, every accidental brush of hands, every lingering touch. I was a detective of unspoken things, and Julian Vance was my most compelling case. My life, once a silent, empty room, was now filled with the clamor of my own thoughts, all of them circling back to the man next door. A week later, the world went dark. A summer thunderstorm had rolled in with surprising ferocity, the sky turning a bruised purple-gray. The wind howled, rattling my windows, and the rain came down in solid sheets. I was at my desk, trying to finalize a logo design, when the lights flickered once, twice, and then died completely. My monitor went black. The hum of the refrigerator ceased. The silence that fell was different from my usual quiet. It was a deep, profound silence, the kind that feels like a held breath. I sat there for a moment, letting my eyes adjust to the gloom. Power outages weren't uncommon, but this one felt definitive. The storm raged outside, a wild, chaotic symphony. I found a couple of candles, their small flames casting dancing, distorted shadows on the walls. My house felt smaller, more isolated than ever. My phone had a 30% charge. I had a book. I would be fine. I was a professional at being alone. Then, a new sound cut through the noise of the storm. A low, steady rumble. I went to the window and peered out through the rain-streaked glass. A soft light was glowing from Julian's garage. The rumble was coming from there. A generator. Of course he had a generator. He was the kind of man who was prepared for anything. I watched for a moment, a strange sort of longing twisting in my gut. He was over there, in his bubble of light and power, and I was here, in my flickering candlelight. The distance between our houses had never felt greater. I turned away from the window, resigned to my solitary evening. 10 minutes later, there was a knock on my door. Solid, patient. His knock. My heart did its familiar leap. I grabbed a flashlight and made my way to the door, my bare feet cold on the floor. When I opened it, he was standing on my covered porch, rain dripping from the ends of his hair and the hem of his jacket. He held a large, heavy-duty flashlight, its beam cutting a clean cone through the stormy darkness. "Power's out," he said, stating the obvious with a small, wry smile. I noticed. I replied, my own smile feeling shaky. "I've got the generator running," he said, and I was about to fire up the grill. No point in both of us eating cold sandwiches in the dark. "Come on over. I've got steaks." The offer was so simple, so practical, but it felt like a lifeline. He wasn't just offering food and light. He was offering companionship. He was breaching the walls of my carefully constructed solitude. "You don't have to do that," I said, the automatic deflection of someone not used to accepting help. "I'm not doing it for you," he said, his gaze direct. "I'm doing it for me. I hate eating alone." The honesty of it disarmed me completely. He wasn't just the capable, stoic widower. He was lonely, just like me. The stone of sympathy in my chest ached. "Okay," I said, the word coming out softer than I intended. "Okay, let me just grab a jacket. And shoes." I returned wearing shoes for once, and holding the only contribution I could think of, a bottle of red wine I'd been saving for a special occasion that had never materialized. "Good man," he said with an approving nod. We made the short, wet dash across the lawn to his back patio. It was covered by an awning, creating a small, dry oasis in the middle of the storm. A string of battery-powered lanterns cast a warm, steady glow over the space. The grill was already heating up, its lid shedding rain. The generator rumbled from the garage, a comforting background noise. It felt like a campsite, a small pocket of civilization carved out of the wilderness. He handed me a corkscrew. "You're on wine duty. I think I can handle that," I said, my hands surprisingly steady as I opened the bottle. He worked at the grill, his movements efficient and sure. The sizzle of the steaks hitting the hot grate was a wonderful sound, followed by the rich, savory scent of cooking meat. The storm raged around us, the rain drumming a constant rhythm on the awning. But in our little bubble of light, it felt safe. Cozy. We ate at a small patio table, the candlelight from inside my house now just a distant flicker. The steaks were perfect, and the wine was smooth. For a while, we didn't talk much, just ate, the sounds of the storm and the quiet satisfaction of a good meal filling the space between us. It wasn't an awkward silence. It was comfortable, companionable. "So, a graphic designer," he said, breaking the quiet. He leaned back in his chair, holding his wine glass. The lantern light carved sharp shadows on his face. "What does that entail exactly?" I found myself telling him. About logos and branding. About the frustrating clients and the rare, satisfying projects where I got to create something I was truly proud of. I talked more than I had in months, the words spilling out of me, lubricated by the wine and the strange intimacy of our situation. He listened. He didn't just wait for his turn to talk. He actually listened, asking smart questions, his eyes fixed on me with that same unnerving intensity. "It sounds lonely," he said after I'd finished, his voice soft. It wasn't a judgment, just an observation. I swallowed. "It can be," I admitted. "I'm used to it." He was quiet for a long moment, swirling the red wine in his glass. The light caught the deep color, making it look like blood. "I'm not," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't think I'll ever get used to it." The air shifted. The conversation had veered into deeper, more dangerous territory. He was talking about his wife, about his grief, without ever saying her name. He was showing me a piece of his vulnerability, a crack in the stoic facade. "I'm sorry," I said, the words feeling hopelessly inadequate. He shook his head, looking up from his glass to meet my eyes. "Don't be. It's just a fact. Like the rain," he gestured out into the darkness. "It's there. You can't do anything about it. You just have to find a way to live with it." He took a sip of wine, his throat working. "The quiet is the hardest part. The house is so loud when it's empty." I knew that sound. The loud silence of an empty house. My house. "I know what you mean," I said softly. Our eyes met over the table, and in that moment, I saw it again. Not just a neighbor being kind. Not just a lonely man making conversation. I saw a flicker of the same raw, unguarded emotion I'd seen in the hallway. A recognition. A connection that went deeper than borrowed hands or shared stakes. It was the silent acknowledgement of a shared ache. "Do you ever think about not being alone, Leo?" he asked, his voice low and serious. The question hung in the air, heavy and loaded. He wasn't asking if I was dating. He was asking something more fundamental. He was asking if I ever wanted to change the basic state of my existence. The rain on the awning was the only sound. I felt as if he had reached across the table and placed a hand directly over my heart. He saw me. He saw the lonely man behind the screen, the ghost in the quiet house. I couldn't look away. All the time, I whispered. The confession, as simple as it was, felt monumental. It was the truest thing I'd said all night, all year. Julian held my gaze, his expression unreadable but for the intensity in his eyes. He gave a slow, deliberate nod, as if I had just confirmed something he had long suspected. The storm howled, but here, under the warm glow of the lanterns, a different kind of storm was brewing. A quiet, terrifying, and exhilarating storm that was just between the two of us. And I had no idea how to find shelter. The power stayed off for another 2 hours. We cleaned up together, moving in a comfortable, synchronized rhythm in the small space of his kitchen, which was lit by a single, powerful lantern on the counter. The ordinary domesticity of it, me washing, him drying, felt extraordinary. I was acutely aware of the brush of his arm against mine as we reached for the same utensil, the way our shoulders bumped as we navigated the space. Each touch was a small, quiet explosion. When the dishes were done, we stood in a strange, silent tableau. The rain had softened to a steady drizzle. The adrenaline of the storm and the wine had faded, leaving behind a humming, expectant tension. The conversation on the patio hung in the air, unfinished. "I should probably head back," I said, breaking the silence. My voice sounded unnaturally loud. "The lights could be off all night," he said. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact, but it felt like an invitation. An offer. Stay? My mind raced. Stay? Here? What would that even mean? Sleeping on the couch in the house of a man I barely knew. A man who made my heart pound and my palms sweat. A man who was grieving his wife. The complexities were a tangled knot in my stomach. "I've got candles," I said weakly. "I'll be fine." It was a retreat, a step back into the safety of my own solitude. I was a coward. He didn't push. He just nodded, his expression giving nothing away. "All right, let me walk you back. You don't need to do that. It's just across the lawn." "I know," he said, already grabbing the heavy-duty flashlight. "But the ground's soaked. Don't want you to trip." His gaze flickered, and I knew he was thinking of the runner rug in his hallway. He was always thinking, always observant. He walked me to my door, the flashlight beam cutting a path through the wet grass. At my porch, I fumbled for my keys, my fingers suddenly clumsy. The air between us was thick with unspoken words. The things we had almost said, the feelings we had almost acknowledged. Thanks again, Julian, I said, finally getting the key in the lock. For the steak. The light, for seeing me. Anytime, Leo, he said. He was standing closer than he needed to. I could feel the warmth radiating from him in the cool, damp air. He lifted a hand, and for a terrifying, exhilarating second, I thought he was going to touch me. Touch my face, my shoulder, anything. But he just rested his hand on the doorframe next to my head, mirroring his posture from that first day in his hallway. He leaned in just a fraction. Get some sleep, he said, his voice a low murmur. His gaze dropped to my mouth again, lingering there for a heartbeat longer than was socially acceptable. The invitation was clear. It was a question being asked without words. Do something. Say something. Close this gap between us. And I did nothing. I stood there, frozen by a lifetime of fear and inaction, and I did absolutely nothing. The moment passed. A flicker of something, disappointment, crossed his face before it was replaced by his usual neutral mask. He straightened up, dropping his hand and stepping back. Good night, Leo, he said, his voice once again polite, distant. Good night, I whispered to his retreating back. I went inside and closed the door, leaning my forehead against the cool wood. I was an idiot, a complete and utter coward. He had offered me a connection, a shared space in the dark, and I had scurried back to my lonely cave. I blew out the candles and laid in my bed, the sound of the rain and the loud, roaring silence of my empty house, my only companions. I didn't sleep. I just replayed the night over and over, berating myself for my own timidity. The next few weeks were a careful, excruciating dance. We'd fallen into a routine of sorts. A shared coffee on his porch some mornings, a brief chat over the fence in the evenings. The interactions were pleasant, neighborly, but the underlying tension, the electric hum that had been present during the storm, had receded. It felt like he had put up a wall. A polite, friendly wall, but a wall nonetheless. He had made a move, in his quiet, understated way, and I had rebuffed him. The window of opportunity, I feared, had closed. I was the one who had to fix it. I, the king of inaction, had to be the one to make a move. The thought was terrifying. My chance came in the form of a lie. A small, stupid, and ultimately life-altering lie. My company was having its annual family and partners picnic, a dreaded event I usually skipped, offering some vague excuse. It was a festival of forced fun and performative happiness. This year, my boss, a relentlessly cheerful woman named Cynthia, had cornered me in a video call. Leo, you have to come this year. And bring someone. It's been years. We're all starting to think you're a figment of our collective imagination, she'd chirped. In a moment of sheer, blind panic, wanting to get her off my back, a sentence fell out of my mouth. Actually, I am seeing someone. I'll bring him. Him. The word hung in the digital air. I had never, not once, been out to anyone at work. I kept my life compartmentalized, my personal self hidden away. But the word was out there now, an irreversible fact. Cynthia's eyes widened in delight. Leo, that's wonderful. I can't wait to meet him. The call ended, and I stared at my blank screen, the full weight of my idiotic life crashing down on me. I had a week to produce a fake boyfriend for a company picnic. There was only one person who came to mind. It was an insane, audacious, and wildly inappropriate idea. It was perfect. It took me 2 full days to work up the nerve. I rehearsed the conversation in my head 100 times, each scenario ending in my utter humiliation. Finally, on a Wednesday evening, I saw him in his front yard, watering a bed of newly planted hydrangeas. It was now or never. I walked over, my heart a frantic bird beating against the cage of my ribs. Julian. He turned, the spray from the hose creating a small rainbow in the evening light. Leo. Everything all right? Yeah, fine. I have a question. I started, my hands shoved deep in my pockets. It's a strange one. And the answer can be, and probably should be, no. He turned the water off and gave me his full attention, a small, curious smile on his face. I'm listening. I took a deep breath and just let it all spill out. The company picnic. My stupid lie. My boss. The fact that I had a week to produce a believable boyfriend or face a level of workplace awkwardness I couldn't even fathom. I finished my mortifying confession and waited for him to laugh, or to slowly back away from the crazy man who lived next door. He was silent for a long time, his expression thoughtful. He looked at me, then at my house, then back at me. I could practically see the gears turning in his head. So, you need me to pretend to be your boyfriend for an afternoon? He finally asked, his voice even. Yes, I said, my voice small. It's a ridiculous ask. I know. I'm sorry I even. What day is it? He interrupted. I blinked. What? The picnic. What day? Saturday. This Saturday. He nodded slowly. I'm free on Saturday. I stared at him, dumbfounded. Wait, really? You do that? Why not? He said with a shrug. Sounds more interesting than regrouting the bathroom. A real smile touched his lips, a genuine one that reached his eyes. There was a mischievous glint in them I'd never seen before. But we need to get our story straight. How did we meet? I let out a shaky laugh, a wave of dizzying relief washing over me. I was thinking the classic way. I needed help hanging a painting. His smile widened. I like that, he said, his gaze holding mine. That's a good start. The days leading up to the picnic were surreal. We were co-conspirators, planning our fictional relationship. We met for coffee each morning, ostensibly to get our story straight. He learned the names of my coworkers. I learned that his favorite color was a deep forest green, that he'd studied architecture before taking over his family's construction business, that his late wife's name was Clara. He spoke of her with a gentle sadness, but also with a warmth that made her feel real to me. He told me about her laugh, her terrible taste in movies, her love for oversized, monstrous art. Sharing these details with me felt significant, like he was entrusting me with a precious part of his past. He was letting me in, bit by bit. The tension between us was back, but it was different now. It was playful, laced with the thrill of our shared secret. There were moments during our planning sessions where the line between pretend and real blurred. So, how long have we been together? I asked, making notes on a pad like a lunatic. Let's say 2 months, he said, leaning back in his chair, a thoughtful look on his face. Things are still new. A little awkward, maybe. We're still figuring each other out. He looked at me, his eyes glinting. That should be easy enough to fake. The jab was so gentle, so accurate, that I couldn't help but laugh. Okay, fair point. Public displays of affection, he continued, his voice dropping a little. What's the policy? Are we handholders? A hand on the back? A full-blown make-out session by the potato salad. My face flushed. I think hand-holding is probably the maximum we need to attempt. Let's not get carried away. Shame, he said, his expression completely deadpan. I was looking forward to the potato salad. I threw a napkin at him, and he caught it, laughing. That real, beautiful laugh. I was starting to realize that the stoic, reserved man I had first observed was only one part of him. Underneath was someone warm, witty, and deeply playful. And he was showing that side to me. Saturday arrived, a bright, sunny, catastrophically beautiful day. I was a nervous wreck. Julian, by contrast, was the picture of calm. He showed up at my door wearing a pair of well-fitting chinos and a soft, forest green polo shirt, his favorite color. He looked handsome, relaxed, and utterly believable as someone I would be lucky enough to date. Ready to do this? He asked, his eyes crinkling in a smile. I think I'm going to be sick, I said honestly. He reached out and squeezed my shoulder, his hand warm and firm. It'll be fine. I'm a great fake boyfriend. 5-star reviews on Yelp. I let out a shaky laugh. Just try not to be more charming than me. Leo, he said, his expression turning serious for a moment. That's not going to be a problem. In the car, on the way to the park, he reached over and took my hand. His fingers laced with mine, his thumb stroking the back of my hand. It was for practice. It was part of the act. But my heart didn't know the difference. It pounded in my chest, a frantic, joyful rhythm. His hand was large, warm, and calloused from work. It felt right. It felt like it belonged there. Just getting into character, he said, his eyes on the road. But I saw the faint color on his cheeks. The picnic was exactly as I'd feared, a sprawling chaos of cheerful families, competitive three-legged races, and far too many people I barely knew. But with Julian by my side, it was different. His calm presence was an anchor. When my boss, Cynthia, descended upon us, her eyes wide with excitement, Julian handled it with an easy grace. So you're the mystery man, she exclaimed. It's so wonderful to finally meet you. Leo's been hiding you. He's a private guy, Julian said smoothly, his hand resting on the small of my back. The familiar, electrifying touch. But I'm slowly drawing him out of his shell. He gave me a look so full of fond affection that for a second, I believed it myself. We spent the afternoon navigating the social minefield. He listened patiently as my coworker Dave droned on about his new boat. He charmed Cynthia by complimenting her notoriously terrible homemade dip. He held my hand as we walked, his thumb rubbing soothing circles on my skin. He played the part of the devoted, attentive boyfriend so perfectly that it hurt. The line between the performance and reality blurred until it was non-existent. When he laughed at a stupid joke I made, it felt real. When he leaned in to whisper a sarcastic comment in my ear about the sack race, his breath warm against my skin, it felt real. When he looked at me, his eyes soft with a manufactured fondness, it felt so devastatingly real that my chest ached. The tipping point came late in the afternoon. We were sitting on a blanket under a large oak tree, slightly away from the main chaos. A game of frisbee was happening nearby, and a stray throw sent the disc sailing toward us. It was headed directly for my face. I flinched, throwing my hands up in a useless gesture. But Julian moved like lightning. He twisted his body, putting himself between me and the incoming projectile. He caught the frisbee with a dull thud against his chest, his arm wrapping around my shoulders to pull me against him in the same motion. "Got it," he said, his voice a low rumble in my ear. I was tucked against his side, my face pressed into his shoulder. I could smell the sun on his skin, the clean scent of his shirt. His arm was a solid, protective weight around me. It wasn't part of the act. It was pure instinct. A protective, immediate reaction. The same instinct that had surged forward in the hallway with the painting. He didn't let go immediately. He held me there for a long moment, his hand stroking my back. I could hear his heart beating, a steady, strong rhythm under my ear. In that moment, surrounded by the noise and laughter of the picnic, we were in our own quiet world. "You okay?" he murmured, his lips close to my hair. I just nodded, unable to speak. I was more than okay. I was overwhelmed. This feeling of being protected, of being cared for, was so foreign and so deeply yearned for. It was breathtaking. Someone shouted for the frisbee, and the spell was broken. Julian pulled back, though his hand lingered on my shoulder. He tossed the frisbee back with a powerful flick of his wrist. He turned back to me, his expression serious. The playful glint was gone, replaced by that familiar, intense scrutiny. "You know," he began, his voice low, "meant only for me. For someone who's just pretending, you're not very good at it." My breath hitched. What do you mean?" "I mean," he said, his gaze unwavering, "the way you look at me when you think I'm not watching. The way you went completely still just now. The way your heart is hammering against my hand." He hadn't moved it. His hand was still on my shoulder, his fingers resting right over my collarbone, where my pulse was jumping like a panicked bird. The world seemed to shrink, the sounds of the picnic fading into a distant buzz. It was just him and me under the oak tree. The pretense was gone. The game was over. "I'm not a very good actor," he continued, his voice softer now. "I've been telling myself this is just me being a good neighbor. Helping you out of a jam." He shook his head slowly. "But that's a lie. A bigger lie than the one you told your boss." My throat was tight. I couldn't form words. I could only stare at him, my heart in my eyes. "I like having coffee with you in the morning, Leo," he said, his voice a raw, honest whisper. "I liked eating steak with you in the middle of a storm. I like the way you get quiet when you're thinking. I like holding your hand, even if it's just for show." He leaned in closer, his face just inches from mine. The air was thick, heavy. This was it. The moment I had ruined after the storm. The chance I thought I had lost forever. It was here again. "This doesn't feel like pretending to me," he said, his eyes searching mine. "Does it feel like pretending to you?" The question was a key, turning a lock deep inside me. All the fear, all the cowardice, all the years of hiding and observing, they just fell away. I was no longer a ghost in my own life. I was here, under this tree, with this man. "No," I whispered, the word a puff of air. "It never has." A slow, beautiful smile spread across Julian's face. A smile of pure, unadulterated relief. It was the most incredible thing I had ever seen. He didn't say anything else. He just leaned in the rest of the way. His lips were soft, hesitant at first. It was a question, a gentle, tentative exploration. It wasn't a kiss for show. It wasn't for Cynthia or Dave or anyone else. It was just for us. I leaned into it, my hand coming up to rest on his jaw, the faint stubble rasping against my palm. The hesitation melted away, replaced by a certainty that flowed between us. It was a kiss that tasted of sunshine and iced tea and the promise of something real. It was quiet and honest and not rushed. It was the end of the pretending and the beginning of everything else. When we finally broke apart, we just looked at each other, our foreheads resting together. His arm was still around me, holding me close. I could feel the smile in his voice when he spoke. "So," he murmured, his breath warm against my lips. "I guess this means we should probably stop by the potato salad on the way out." I laughed, a real, full-throated laugh of pure joy. It felt like letting go of a breath I'd been holding for years. I laced my fingers with his, our hands resting on the blanket between us. A real connection. No pretense. No lies. "Yeah," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "I guess it does." The drive home was quiet, but it was a different kind of quiet. A full silence, not an empty one. It was filled with the low hum of the engine, the fading afternoon light, and the comfortable weight of Julian's hand holding mine on the center console. Nothing needed to be said. The most important things already had been, not with words, but with a look, a touch, a kiss under an oak tree. When we pulled into my driveway, he turned off the car, but neither of us moved to get out. The space inside the vehicle felt sacred, a bubble protecting the fragile, beautiful new thing we had just created. "So," I said, breaking the comfortable silence, "thank you for being my fake boyfriend." He turned to me, his expression soft in the dimming light. "Thank you for asking." He squeezed my hand. "What happens now?" The question was simple, but it held the weight of the future. The picnic was over. The pretense was done. Now came the reality. My old anxieties, the familiar fear of things being too good to be true, started to whisper at the edges of my mind. What if this was just a moment? A product of a strange situation? I started, then stopped. I didn't know what to say. The brave man from under the tree seemed to have vanished, replaced by the familiar, overthinking Leo. Julian must have seen the flicker of panic in my eyes. He was always so perceptive. He brought my hand to his lips and pressed a soft kiss to my knuckles. The gesture was so tender, so reassuring, it silenced the anxious voices in my head. "How about this?" he said, his voice low and steady. "How about you come over to my place, and I'll make us some real dinner? Not picnic food. And we can just talk. No story to get straight. No pretense. Just us. Just us." My heart picked up its pace. It sounded simple. It sounded perfect. It sounded like exactly what I wanted more than anything in the world. "I'd like that," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "I'd like that a lot." That night, we didn't solve everything. We didn't map out our entire future. We sat at his sturdy oak dining table, the one I had watched the movers carry in, and we talked. He told me about his fear of forgetting the sound of Clara's laugh, and how talking about her with me made it feel less like she was fading. I told him about the deep, ingrained loneliness I had mistaken for a personality trait, and how the last few weeks had made me realize it was just a state I had been stuck in. It was a conversation of gentle vulnerabilities and quiet confessions. There were moments of awkwardness, long pauses where we both seemed to be processing the enormity of what was happening. But there were also moments of easy laughter, of shared understanding that felt as old as time. After dinner, we ended up in his living room, sitting on the ridiculously large leather armchair. It was big enough for both of us, if we sat close. And we did. I was tucked against his side, my head resting on his shoulder, his arms securely around me. It felt as natural as breathing. "That painting is still on the floor in the hallway," he murmured into my hair. I smiled against his shoulder. "I know. I walk past your house, and I can feel it judging me." He chuckled, the vibration rumbling through his chest and into mine. "Maybe we should try to hang it again tomorrow." "Is that a good idea?" I asked, tilting my head to look up at him. "It didn't go so well last time." "I think it went perfectly," he said, his expression serious. He leaned down and kissed me, slow and deep. A kiss of confirmation. A kiss that said, "This is real." The next morning, I woke up in my own bed, alone. For a split second, a cold, familiar panic seized me. Had I dreamed it all? The picnic, the kiss, the long, honest conversation? Was I back in my grayscale world? But then I smelled it. The faint, lingering scent of sawdust and soap and Julian on my pillow. I got out of bed and went to my kitchen window, my heart a hopeful, fluttering thing. And I saw him. He was on his porch, holding 2 coffee mugs. He was looking at my house, waiting. When he saw me in the window, he didn't just wave. He smiled. A wide, genuine, beautiful smile. And he lifted one of the mugs in a clear invitation. I didn't hesitate. I didn't overthink. I pulled on a shirt, slipped on my shoes, and walked out my front door, across the lawn that no longer felt like a border between 2 separate kingdoms, but like a bridge. He handed me a mug as I came up the steps. The coffee was hot and strong, just how I liked it. He must have remembered from one of our planning sessions. "Morning," he said, his voice a little rough with sleep. "Morning," I replied, my voice full of a feeling I couldn't quite name. It was a cocktail of relief, joy, and a deep, bone-deep sense of peace. We stood there in the quiet morning air, sipping our coffee, not saying anything. We didn't need to. The silence between us was no longer empty. It was full. It was comfortable. It was ours. A car drove by, and Mrs. Gable, on her morning power walk, slowed down to stare. She gave a little, surprised wave. I felt a flicker of my old anxiety, the fear of being seen, of being judged. But then Julian's hand found mine, his fingers lacing through mine. A simple, public declaration. He didn't look at Mrs. Gable. He looked at me, a question in his eyes. "Are you okay?" I squeezed his hand and smiled. For the first time, the answer was an unequivocal, uncomplicated yes. We spent the day together. We didn't hang the painting. Instead, we worked in his garden, side by side. I, who had never successfully kept a plant alive, found myself learning how to prune roses and tell the difference between a weed and a perennial. He was a patient teacher, his hands often brushing mine as he showed me what to do. Each touch was still a small spark, but it was no longer a source of anxiety. It was a source of warmth. We talked about everything and nothing. Favorite movies, childhood memories, dreams for the future. I learned that he'd always wanted to build a cabin by a lake. I told him I'd always wanted to illustrate a children's book. We were filling in the outlines of each other, adding color and texture and detail. That evening, we sat on his porch swing, a gentle breeze rustling the leaves of the trees. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. I leaned my head on his shoulder, his arm wrapped around me, a position that was quickly becoming my favorite place in the world. "I feel like I've known you for years," I said softly. "Me too," he replied, his voice a low rumble. "Or maybe I just feel like I've been waiting for you for years." The honesty of his words stole my breath. I thought back to the man I had been just a few months ago, the ghost in the quiet house, watching the world from a window. It felt like a lifetime ago. Julian hadn't just come into my life. He had pulled me into his. He had pulled me into the world. He had shown me what it felt like to not just observe, but to participate, to feel, to live. I looked at him, at the strong, kind lines of his face, at the silver in his hair catching the last rays of sunlight, at the steady love in his eyes. My heart was full, so full it felt like it might burst. The yearning that had been a constant hum in the background of my life had been replaced by a quiet, profound contentment. He must have seen the emotion on my face. He leaned in and kissed me, a soft, lingering kiss that tasted like home. "What are you thinking about?" he murmured against my lips. I smiled, a real, genuine smile that came from the deepest part of me. "I was just thinking," I said, my voice full of a hope I hadn't known I was capable of feeling, "that I'm finally home."